Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and it is Friday. Hooray! I hope that you have some fun weekend plans or some productive weekend plans or, whatever your ideal weekend is. I hope that's what you have planned because I want you to have an ideal weekend. I am very excited to bring you today's author interview. I'm always excited to bring you the author interviews, but you may recall from the last episode that I had so much fun last weekend interviewing the two authors that I have on the podcast this week. They're very different. They write very different books, and yet I had so much fun with both of them, and there was a lot of laughter, and definitely needed that, I think, in my weekend last week. It had been a long week in many ways, and having some laughter and a couple of really fun interviews was a good stress relief. Let's just say that. So today I am speaking with Brenda Marie Smith about her debut novel. It is an apocalyptic thriller. And in suburban Austin, B. Crenshaw, a bohemian grandmother, secretly preps for the end times, stockpiling food, seed, and supplies. After a solar pulse destroys modern life, she's left alone with her 4 grandkids, whose parents never return. Forced to survive off the grid without power or running water, B and her imperiled clan must confront traumatized teens, starving neighbors, and plundering marauders. If Darkness Takes Us fuses dystopian adventures with the heart of literary fiction to provide a riveting tale charged with thrills and the resilience of family. Again, that is the title, the description of the book. Did I mention the title of the book? It's called If Darkness Takes Us. It is in the description of the book, but I don't think I mentioned it at the beginning. So the book is If Darkness Takes Us. The author is Brenda Marie Smith. It is post-apocalyptic thriller. It is a dystopian future kind of book, but not your typical dystopian future kind of book, which are often young adult books. This does have teenagers in it, but they are not the main character. They are the grandchildren of the main character. And you don't often get a grandmother being the main character of an apocalyptic thriller. So that was one of my favorite things about this book. I enjoyed the realness of it. I mean, often when you read post-apocalyptic thrillers like this, there are some pretty fantastical elements in them, whether that's zombies or some kind of crazy virus. This one is still has some pretty crazy elements, but it's a very, I think, realistic look at what could happen if suddenly you have no power. You are trying to figure out how to live on the supplies that you have, and you have no way to communicate with the outside world, really, because, again, you have no power. The cars stop working because it's basically an EMP that goes through. So B's paranoia, if you will, pays off because she has prepared way more than her neighbors, but that can lead to difficulties, of course, as people begin to realize that things are not going to go back to normal anytime soon. So B is a really interesting character with quirks and foibles and flaws like any person, but she is fiercely dedicated to her grandchildren, and she is trying to figure out what life in this new world is going to look like. So let's go ahead and turn to that interview with Brenda. Before we get there, I do have copies of this book to give away, so stay tuned until the end of the episode to find out what you will need to comment on in order to be entered into the giveaway. And now, let us turn to the interview with Brenda Marie Smith. Hi, Brenda. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks so much for having me.
I am excited to have you here. We are going to talk about your book. It's called If Darkness Takes Us. It's a thriller. Before we get to the book, though, if you could share a little bit about yourself, that would be wonderful.
Okay, thanks. Well, I'm a grandmother living in Austin, Texas with my hubby, Doug, and he wants everyone to know that he is not Cranky Hank from the book.
I wondered about that.
Well, he did give me an idea for Hank when he had a cranky day, but no, he's a sweetheart, really. I do bookkeeping and income taxes part-time, and I write the rest of the time. I have 2 sons and 3 stepsons, and they're all grown. I have 2 grandkids. I was born and raised in Oklahoma City, and I hitchhiked away from there at age 18, back when people did that. Eventually going back to the land in the Ozark Mountains, and from there I lived on a vegan hippie community in Tennessee called The Farm, where my sons were delivered by midwives. And both in Arkansas and Tennessee, I lived off the grid for a few years. I moved to Austin almost 40 years ago and started a tofu salad manufacturing company that's still in business, even though I don't own it anymore. I manage nonprofits and student co-op housing. I promoted concerts, and for the past 20 years, with a 6-year break to work on a huge insurance claim for Hurricane Katrina, kind of like B in the book. I've been writing and doing bookkeeping, including, and I took classes online through the UCLA Writers Program. I paid an editor to tutor me on the craft of fiction and drama, and I have a great writers group for several years now, with 2 published award-winning authors, and I have other critique partners, and I just write and read a lot of other people's writing, and we work together to make our books better.
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's fun, really. I mean, it drives you crazy on the one hand, but I can't imagine doing anything else.
Well, it sounds like
something's going to drive you crazy no matter what you do.
Yes. So, give us the premise of If Darkness Takes Us.
Okay. Well, the tagline I used to pitch the book is this: Grandma B prepped for apocalypse, but when a solar pulse destroys modern life, traumatized teens could be her undoing. It's apocalyptic or dystopian science fiction, a thriller, but it sticks very close to reality, and it's told in the current day Southern literary voice. The basic story is in suburban Austin, Texas, Bea Crenshaw is keeping her 4 grandkids for a long weekend, while their parents and her husband, that she calls Hank the Crank, go up to Dallas for a football game. And while they're gone, a solar pulse strikes Earth and takes down the whole U.S. grid and most of the cars, which also means no phones, no natural gas, no running water, no transportation, no doctors, no communication, except Bea is able to, she has a wind-up shortwave radio where she's able to get one broadcast. That's the only news they have from outside their neighborhood. She's left alone with her 4 grandkids whose parents don't return home, and she has to teach the kids to survive before her heart gives out. She's got Keno, who's 17, Tasha, who's 15, Milo, 12, and Maisie, who's 6. But luckily, Bee has secrets, plus a whole lot of courage and a fierce love for her grandkids. Unbeknownst to anyone in her family, I don't think this is giving too much away because you learn it early in the book. She saw disaster coming, and she's been stockpiling to keep her family alive if such a disaster should ever strike. So that's, a whole lot of things happen from there. Just, a hard scrabble life, trying to get used to it. They've got a whole lot of neighbors who need help. They have to figure out how they can help them without making themselves starve. It's full of dilemmas and lots of family drama, family survival story, really.
Now that you've heard a little bit about the book from Brenda herself, we're going to go ahead and take our first break of the podcast. When we come back, we'll be talking more about Bee as the main character. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
The GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today with Brenda Marie Smith about her debut novel, an apocalyptic thriller called If Darkness Takes Us. Let's get back to that interview.
And one of my favorite aspects of it is that, there's a lot of kind of dystopian thrillers out there, but this one has a main character that isn't your typical main character. She's an older woman. She is trying to take care of her grandchildren. You get the teenage perspective in there, but you also get the perspective of these teenagers that are typical teens and, drive her a little bit crazy.
Right.
And so you get that really human aspect of the relationship between Bee and her grandkids.
Yeah, well, I do have a couple of grandkids, so that helped me, although mine aren't teens yet. Well, one of them just turned 13. I highly recommend, if you ever write a book, and you have a grandson named Miles, do not name a teenage grandkid Milo. Because I did, and I'm always accidentally calling my real-life grandson Milo, because sometimes I spend more time with Milo than I do with my own grandson.
Oh, my goodness, that's funny. What was your initial inspiration for the story?
Well, like Bee, I'm pretty worried about the environment, worried sick, I would say, and what our modern lifestyles are doing to it. I mean, I love my creature comforts as much as the next person, but the way we're going about getting them is not sustainable. And I wanted to show what it might be like to suddenly be without modern technology and how none of us are prepared for this. And I wanted to write a different type of apocalyptic story where characters band together to help each other and to survive. And since I believe that most people are good at heart, and I don't think society will break down immediately, at least, into roving bands of murderous marauders like so many apocalyptic stories have. That's not to say there won't be some, because we have some of those people even now. But in the Great Depression, for instance, people starved, but they didn't turn into maniacs and create, vigilante groups and all that kind of thing. So I just wanted to write how I thought it might really happen. I tried to imagine how it would really happen. And I also wanted to write a story from the perspective of a grandmother, because like you said, you don't see that very much. So, and I wanted to write a story about family, too, because that's what attracts me most, is family interactions and characters. So.
All right. Yeah. Thank you for that. We have mentioned the main character, Bee. She's a grandmother. She is a prepper, if you will. What about her do you think is going to resonate with readers?
Well, she's a modern American grandmother, for one, and most people have one, or they are one. Many women are one. And it makes her pretty darn unique in current day literature, or literature of any kind for that matter. She, especially for it to be told in her voice from her perspective, and she's kind of a powerhouse. She's funny and smart and discombobulated, and but she has tons of life experience, so she knows how to survive, as difficult as it is. And she's driven by great love and ferocious instincts to protect her grandkids. But she's also flawed, and the situation taxes her to the max. Her health is failing, but it forces her to use all her smarts and knowledge and courage. She learns and grows. She gets beat down, but she gets back up and keeps going. And she even has an old folks romance, which is something rare in literature. She's a modern-day hero, a woman of power, but she's also vulnerable. People tell me they love Bee's unique voice and her wisdom and her flaws. She makes tons of mistakes, but she just never, ever gives up.
Absolutely, and that's one thing that I really like about her as well. She's done all this work and she's prepared for so many things, but that doesn't mean that when the situation that she's been preparing for happens, she's ready. She's got everything planned out. She still has to go through all of the factors of, well, I didn't plan for this, and how could I have planned for X, Y, and Z?
Right. Yeah, and I mean, you can't. There's only so much you can prepare, and I mean that's one of her character arcs, is that she gets knocked off balance by the fact that she couldn't prepare for everything as hard as she tried, and that it knocks her off her game to realize that she couldn't control it, even though she knew it was coming, because she's a little bit of a control freak. But she has to learn, like we all do, how to get better about that. She's not like a crazy control freak, but she's kind of bossy, I guess you'd say. And being a little bossy myself, I know how that is.
What kind of research did you do for the book?
Well, there's kind of two aspects to it. So naturally I had to research solar pulses and magnetic shifts and what effect they might have on the grid, on the cars and phones and people, all that. Back in 2013, 2014, when I did the initial research, some of the aspects of my story weren't fully known, or at least they weren't available to me when I was looking for them, about the magnetic shift in particular and the full effects of a solar pulse. So I had to speculate based on what I could learn about certain things. And then it turned out that now the science has advanced, and it turns out that my speculations about magnetic shift were spot on, and that was gratifying that I'm allowed to speculate in speculative science fiction, but it was great to find out that it could actually happen similarly to how I described it. But the other thing about my research is that I lived a whole lot of it. People, they often assume that I had to research how to live off the grid, but I didn't really, because in my past I had already lived without electricity and running water, with outhouses and building fires to cook and keep warm. I'd already done that for several years. And then I'm also an old anti-nuclear activist, so I know about the nuclear fuel cycle and how dangerous that is, and how it will break down if you don't have electricity and cause untold number of gigantic problems. My sons were delivered by midwives, so I know about birth and treating illnesses. When you're short on meds, I know what it's like to go a little hungry, to try to live off what you grow. So basically, my life experience gave me a head full of this kind of information that I spilled onto a page, and then I had to whip it into readable shape, something that someone would want to read. In fact, I had to leave a whole lot of what I know out of the book just to keep from boring people to death with it. But
it's always important, I suppose, to find that balance between sharing everything you know about certain topics and not overwhelming your readers with all of those details, although I think Brenda has led an incredibly interesting sounding life, so she probably had, I don't know that she would necessarily be boring unless, she just droned on about just the minutia, but I don't know. She sounds like she's had a very interesting life, but we are going to go ahead and take another break. When we come back, we'll be talking more about the book, of course, and Brenda's writing, so stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. Before the break, Brenda was talking about some of the experiences of her own life that she brought into the book. So let's go ahead and get back to the interview and that topic of conversation.
You have a ton of life experience, so you were able to weave that in, which is cool. So that kind of answers my follow-up question about autobiographical elements. Obviously, there are quite a few of them in there. How would you say B is different from you?
Well, she thinks a lot like I do, but she's a lot more prim and proper, more restrained, whereas I'm a little more mouthy and I cuss more and that kind of thing. I'm not as good of a girl as B, I should say. And I like B, I worked insurance claim for money on it, and I have solar panels on my house that won't work without the grid unless I have a $70,000 battery attached, which of course I can't afford. I don't have $2 million that I inherited to stockpile for apocalypse. So, all I got is what's in my pantry, which isn't much. It won't last very long. But if I ever get rich, there's a house that's behind my house that I've wanted to buy ever since I've lived here for 25 years, and someday I might buy it. I have to talk to people
Nice.
who live there into selling it. But anyway, let's see. I have a big step family and 5 kids like Bee, but all mine are boys, and she has 2 girls. And I don't know anything about raising girls, so I had to rely heavily on friends who have to tell me how that works. And I lived through 2 bad marriages. Bee is still in her first marriage, but I know how those can work, how marriage can deteriorate, and I also know how great it is to finally find the right man. So I found Doug about 25 years ago, and very happy to have found him. So I tend to borrow aspects of a lot of different people to create characters, not just me, but a little bit. There's a little bit of my parents and my grandparents in there, and and I just think I would find it extremely daunting to try to create real people, especially people I know, to recreate them on the page. I just think it'd be practically impossible to get them right, so I just, create characters a little bit from this person, a little bit from that person, and a lot of stuff I just make up based on my understanding of human nature, So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this story is told from Bee's perspective, and as you mentioned, she does have the 4 grandkids. There is a sequel on your website that is told from Kino's perspective. He's the 17-year-old. Is that out, or when will that be out?
Well, I don't have a contract yet for that book, but my publisher, SFK Press, they're great but mighty press out of Atlanta, and they're very dedicated to promoting new Southern literature, Southern voices of the new millennium. And they're very interested in it because they want to also, because they're limited in how many books they can publish per year, and they also want to showcase, diverse voices. I kind of have to wait my turn. But they're interested in publishing it in 2021, assuming I can get it right. I was calling it done, and then I decided that I really needed to make it better. Like my publisher mentioned, he wanted it to be even better than Bee's book. So it's very different because it's a completely different voice. It's from first person, present tense, narrative from an 18-year-old. He's 18 by the time we get to this book, and from his perspective. And luckily, I raised 5 sons, so it turns out I have an 18-year-old boy living inside me. I didn't know this until I started writing the book. And he just came spewing out of me. I mean, I could not type fast enough to keep up with him. I was doing NaNoWriMo, where you try to write 50,000 words of a novel in 30 days. I wrote 120,000 words in 26 days. Then I've spent ever since trying to whip all that back into, readable shape, like I said. But I sometimes I think I actually talk more like my sons used to talk when they were teenagers than they do now. But so a lot of cussing, just casual cussing, not like mean, bad cussing, just
Right.
So anyway, and just a kind of a fresh, fun perspective on how things look from being a young guy looking at the world with a dismal future and trying to find hope in it.
Mm-hmm. My main question is, he learns to blow his nose.
Yes, he does. Also,
random for the listener, but needs so.
Right. interesting is, and I need to actually mention this in the second book, is that their diet has changed, their whole lifestyle has changed, and when it changed, I think that helped his nose. It's less of a problem than it used to be.
That's good to know. Thank you for that.
Yeah, he had to grow up, and it's kind of like a coming of age story in an apocalypse is what it is. And he's married. He's only 18, but he's married, which is really unique, but something that I think would happen in an apocalyptic situation. So and he you know, his grandma's sick, and he has to kind of be the leader of the family. So that's really a big deal for a kid.
Absolutely. Are you working on? Is that what you're working on now? Or are you working on?
Well, yeah.
Currently?
Okay. So I do income taxes for a living. So right now I'm doing taxes and what's that?
I said this time of year you're busy then.
Yes, but I you know, it kind of works out because I work for myself and I have lulls in between clients and stuff. So in between I've been doing editing, and I spend a lot of time revising the beginning. I think the rest of it's going to go faster. So I should have that done within a few months, the revising, and then I'll send it off to the publisher, and I'm sure they'll want more changes because that's how publishers are. But also I have another story outlined that I'm itching to work on. It's about hippies living off the grid in the Arkansas mountains, and I hope to get at least drafted by the end of the year. So, you know, and I have other ideas for stories, like a third one in this series of B and Kino. I have tons of material for a third or fourth one, but we got to get the second one out the door first.
Right.
So.
And on your website, there's also another book called Something Radiates. Do you want to talk a little bit about that one as well?
Yeah, thank you for asking about it. I self-published that book. I raised the money to do that with crowdfunding, which was kind of like a modern-day take on what Charles Dickens did, where you basically, even though you can't exactly say that, you're selling the books in advance of publication. So you get people to donate $25 and they get an autographed book later on when it comes out, that kind of thing. So that I raised the money to self-publish with crowdfunding, and that was good. Turns out I have a lot of friends willing to help me with that. And it's a paranormal thriller, and it's based on hippie lore. I tend to have a hippie theme running through all my stories. Well, it's the thing about me that's kind of unique, so I figure I have a little market niche with it. It's based on theories of Timothy Leary and Carl Jung, Carlos Castaneda, and Zen Buddhism. And Sarah Stevens is a single mom who's a little bit telepathic. She's raising two young teen sons in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, when her controlling ex-husband returns to haunt her life, and he gets increasingly dangerous, and she has to use all her psychic skills and mystical practices to thwart him. And naturally, he shows up when she's finally really falling in love with a good man, Johnny. And so it's a big romantic element, paranormal romance that's different. It's very different than your average paranormal romance.
Yeah, it sounds like it. That's great.
observant listeners are probably saying, wait a minute, didn't she say this was the debut novel? And you would be correct because I would be incorrect. I don't know why I said it was Brenda's debut novel. It's not. Just clearing that up. Sorry about my own confusion. Let's take a break and I'll see if I can get my brain back on track. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. Before the break, Brenda was talking about her other novel, the one that is actually her debut novel, not this one. Yeah. So let's go ahead and get back to the interview with Brenda.
You have come to writing from, of course, your own unique experience and your life's journey. So do you have advice for aspiring authors?
I have more advice than we have time for. No, yeah. Well, first thing you have to do is read voraciously. Like, I was writing Something Radiates, and I had gotten it all drafted, but it wasn't quite right, and I knew it, and everything I tried to do to fix it wasn't working. When I got that big insurance job where I worked for 6 years, like 60-hour weeks, or, well, not that many hours per week for the whole time, but for most of the time, and I was too tired to write, but what I could do is read, when late at night, and I just figured if I read, even if I'm tired, maybe I'll absorb good writing by osmosis. So I read hundreds of books, and you know what? It worked. Like, at the end of it all, when I finally got to get back to the book, I knew how to fix it. So I really advise that. Read in your genre, but also read classics, and study the craft. And most important of anything, learn how to build characters, because they are the source of your drama. You don't have a plot without good characters, or not a plot that anybody cares about anyway. So, and then find editors and other writers who you trust to give you solid feedback, and share your story drafts. Get feedback, give your feedback to them, return the favors, and tap into the great writing community on Twitter and other places online. There's lots of lovely people out there who are always willing to help each other. It's amazing, really, how much writers help each other. You think they'd be more competitive, but they're really not. They're helpful. And then finally, writing is rewriting. So I rewrite my books dozens of times, and certain scenes and passages more than that. And then I probably go through it like 100 times, just tweaking it and smoothing things out. Don't be married to using any certain words or including any certain things in the book unless they serve the story and the drama. If they don't develop character or contribute to the drama, you don't need it in your story, That's not to say you can't have any asides, but you don't want to go too far on any tangents. And basically never, ever give up. It took me almost 20 years to find a publisher. And while you wait, you just keep improving until your work is so good that someone will want to publish it. And just don't give up. Keep looking. If you get turned down by the big five or by agents. There's other ways to get published. Just keep going. Go to small publishers, self-publish, whatever it takes.
Yeah, I mean, that is an amazing story of persistence. So that's great.
Well, I wanted to write since I was 6 years old, so I started. I wrote my first story standing on those old-fashioned metal A-frame swing sets that they used to have back when I was a kid, 100 years ago, or 60-something years ago. So I'm standing on the cross beam of one of those, and I lived in Oklahoma, where it's always really windy, and I was letting the wind kind of blow on me, and I just wrote a story in my head that I ran inside and wrote down about a girl named Wendy who could fly on the wind. And I've wanted to write stories ever since, and the only time I really had time to write was right after I got out of school, and then I just felt like I was too young. I didn't know what I wanted to say. And then after that, before I know it, I'm having kids, and I'm so busy I can't see straight. So, I had to wait till I grew up before I got a chance. But it's, don't give up. It's worth it.
Mhm. Yeah. You mentioned reading hundreds of books at that one point. Do you have favorite authors and genres, or do you have go-to authors and genres that you turn to when you want to read?
Well, I'm less focused on genres than I am on great characters and great drama. So, I'm a big fan of Toni Morrison, Joyce Carol Oates. Jean Le Carré writes these great spy stories, would then have geopolitical implications, but they're also that guy can draw a character with just a brushstroke. I don't know how he does it. I read all his books. Some of them I read 2 or 3 times, and I can't figure out how he does it, but it's so good. Dean Koontz, John D. MacDonald, who wrote back in the 50s and 60s, great little mystery stories that are just loaded with good characterizations. Ann Tyler, and then, Dickens, Faulkner, Fitzgerald, Steinbeck, Hemingway, all those. And P.D. James, really great. I'm mostly interested in good drama, which stems from great characters. So I'll read any book in any genre that fits that bill. But I kind of read in different genres, because I figure you can learn something from any book, whether it's good or bad. So you can learn something and learn what is out there. You learn about the market that way, if nothing else. So I don't know. I like to read. The more time I spend writing, the less time I have for reading, so I'm glad that I got a good backlog. The best recent book I read was The Goldfinch. That was really good.
Thank you. I know you have a website, so if you can share the website and where people can maybe interact with you, if you have any social media or anything.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at @BSmithNovelist. I'm on Facebook at Books by Brenda Marie Smith. I have a website, BrendaMarieSmith.com, and you can email me through that site. I have a blog, BrendaMarieSmith.tumblr.com, and where I have a 13-part series about what to stock and what not to stock for an apocalypse. It's kind of, some of it's funny and some of it is serious. And then I also have, on that blog, I have a couple of true slices of life stories about things that happened to me. I've got some poetry, a political rant or two, links to other things that I like. And I have some readings from Something Radiates on YouTube and other readings from If Darkness Takes Us that are coming. I just don't have them up yet because my brother is one who got those set up, and so I have to work with him to get it onto my YouTube channel. And then you can also just search for me on Amazon and Goodreads. I have a lot of good book reviews there. And you can find me on Google, where I have a few other interviews I've done, and there's another podcast up and some more book reviews, that kind of thing. So I'm kind of all over the place.
Yeah, you are. That's great. So we've talked about a lot of different things, but is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to talk about at this point?
Oh, gosh. Well, I made notes about things, but I think I already talked about them. One thing that's about me is I'm kind of an obsessive kind of person. So my son, who's in his 40s, lived with me recently for a couple of years after, of course, not living with me for a long time, when he was saving up money to go on a big trip to Costa Rica. And he and I watched literally every single apocalyptic movie or series we could find. Now, there was a few of the series we gave up on because they weren't very good, but we watched everything. So if you have any questions about apocalypses, I'm your gal. And then, of course, apocalyptic books. I forgot to mention my favorite apocalyptic.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. I forgot to mention my favorite apocalyptic books, which is Cormac McCarthy's The Road, best one ever of all time. Nobody can touch it. And then there's also On the Beach by Neville Shute, which is also, and both of those are also great movies too. So anyway, and I'm just a grandma. I'm the neighborhood novelist. I go around. I'm kind of shameless. I take a book with me everywhere I go, and if I haven't met you yet, I'm like, look, I wrote a book.
I love it.
Which most people get all excited about it, but I've had a couple of people be like, yeah, and so.
Right. Would you like
I'm like, okay, so you don't care, but you know. That's right.
Right. You got to promote yourself, right?
Well, nobody else is going to. It took me forever to just get over that and realize I had to do it because, I was raised to be shy and polite and not to ever tout yourself,
Mm-hmm.
not to ever let anybody know how smart you are or hard or, just so I found it really hard to do at first, but once I get going, it's hard to stop me.
Wonderful. B, I have so enjoyed talking to you. B, I just called you B. That's hilarious.
That's common. That's common.
Now you know how your grandson feels.
Right. He's very kind about being called Milo. He's going to read the book, he says, but I think he's a little scared of it, and I don't blame him. He's only 13.
Aww.
I said, well, you don't have to read it. You can wait. I gave him a copy. I said, just read it whenever you want to.
That's right.
Yeah.
I have so enjoyed talking to you today. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk about this book, If Darkness Takes Us.
Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it, too.
Thank you once again to Brenda for joining me on the podcast. I had so much fun speaking with her. Thank you, as always, to you, my listeners. As I said at the beginning of the podcast, I do have copies of If Darkness Takes Us to give away. So in order to be entered into that giveaway, you just need to go to GSMC Book Review. Let me start that again. GSMC Book Review Facebook. Twitter, or Instagram and comment on this post, episode 215, interview with Brenda Marie Smith. You can like it, you can share it, do all those things, but in order to be entered into the contest, into the giveaway, you do have to comment. And your comment must be, let's see, what life skill or skills do you think you would take with you into the apocalyptic future? What do you think your best life skill that you have currently that would suit you best and would be most beneficial in the apocalyptic future? What is that? I have no idea for my own self. I don't think crocheting is going to get me anywhere. Crocheting and podcasting, I don't really think those are going to get me anywhere in the apocalypse, but I'll think about it. Thankfully, I already have my own copy of If Darkness Takes Us, so I don't have to enter the giveaway to win, and I don't have to think of my best life skill. But if you would like to win a copy of If Darkness Takes Us, that's all you have to do. Just go on social media, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Speaking of social media, if you would follow us, retweet, share, do all that wonderful stuff. And if you're a fan of the podcast, please do subscribe and give us a nice review, whether written or 5 stars. We would love it. Thank you again to Brenda. Thank you, as always, to you. I hope you will join me again on Tuesday when I will have a returning author. Tess Gerritsen is coming back to the podcast to talk about her newest novel. It is not one of the Rizzoli and Isles series. It is a standalone novel. It is paranormal romance, thriller, mystery, supernatural, creepy, all kinds of different elements to it. So it's called The Shape of Night, and join me for that interview on Tuesday. In the meantime, have a wonderful weekend, and as always, take some time to get yourself lost in a good book. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.